This is The Briefing. I'm Sally Bundock. Our top stories. Theresa May continues her diplomatic trip to China, but the shadow of Brexit still looms large. A controversial memo that claims the FBI is biased against Donald Trump is expected to be published today. Aiming to support education in developing countries, a high-level summit is opening in Senegal. 2.1 billion friends and counting, and more profit than ever. But Facebook users are spending less time on the network. Also in business, we'll be live in Delhi as India's finance minister prepares to present the budget. A very warm welcome to the programme. We're going to brief you on all you need to know in global news, business and sport in this hour. And also we would like you to be a part of the conversation today. There's been a lot of reaction to Formula One's decision to axe the glamorous grid girls, as they're known. So what do you think about that? Is this progress, or is it political correctness gone mad? Well, just use the hashtag BBC The Briefing. We begin with the FBI, which has grave concerns about the accuracy of a confidential memo that alleges bias in the Justice Department against President Trump. The White House is expected to publish the memo today. The Democrats claim the document is an attempt to discredit the FBI's investigation into Russian meddling in the US elections. Our Washington correspondent David Willis has more.
The FBI, in a rare statement, has said that it does not think it's a good idea for this memo to be released, expressing grave concerns over what it says are omissions, which therefore render the document itself inaccurate. The Democrats say the memo is selective and is aimed by the Republicans at discrediting the investigation that's being undertaken into collusion, Russian collusion, in the 2016 election by the special counsel Robert Mueller.
Obviously, the Department of Justice and the FBI feel that this is an extraordinarily reckless step to take because the information hasn't been vetted, they haven't been able to do analysis of what the impact on sources and methods are, and while that analysis is supposed to go on, you have a president who the White House says hasn't even read the memo.
And Adam Schiff believes that releasing that memo might be a pretext for Donald Trump to sack the special prosecutor Robert Mueller and indeed the man who appointed him, the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein.
Of course, the danger in all of this, besides the obvious one of politicizing the intelligence process, is that it send a message to the White House that he can fire Rod Rosenstein or he can fire Bob Mueller, and there are GOP members who are so vested in his presidency that they will roll over. And that will cause a constitutional crisis.
Well, owing to the sensitive nature of that memo, the White House has to sign off on its release, and there are reports here that it is looking to do so possibly as early as later today, Thursday.
That's David Willis, who's based in Washington for us. More detail on that story on our website. Let's now take a look at UK Prime Minister Theresa May. She is, of course, in China on a 3-day tour. While she's been there, she's signalled she'll oppose a proposal made by the European Union to ensure full residency rights for EU citizens who move to the UK during the transition period after Brexit. So, the Prime Minister, who, as I've mentioned, is in China, said the British people had not voted in the EU referendum for nothing to change. Well, let's go live to Beijing, speak to our correspondent there, Stephen McDonnell, who's keeping track of her trip. Good to see you, Stephen. Wherever she goes, she's going to be grilled about the terms of leaving the European Union, and this one puts her at odds with Brussels, doesn't it?
Indeed, and I think some people will see this as a sign of nervousness on her part. I mean, you come to China, You're speaking to the top two leaders in this very powerful country with the potential to sign huge deals which can affect Britain's economy, and yet you're speaking to reporters about Brexit still. And I think this shows the concern on her part back at home over this, over the details of this Brexit deal. And you know, I think it'll be seen by some as getting tough, in standing up for Britain, etc., and some might like it, but others are going to wonder what the details are. I mean, you mentioned that the EU is saying its citizens should have full rights during this transition period, but what rights are we talking about? It could be that they're not that significant, or it could be that they're very significant. We just have to see what aspects of those rights for Europeans in that transition period might not be available to them.
In the meantime, Stephen, how is her trip going in China? She arrived with, you know, a huge business delegation, people representing companies like BP, Jaguar, Land Rover. How are they getting on?
Yeah, well, indeed. I mean, this is a big effort on Britain's part to try and push ahead economic relations with China. I mean, there are certain deals that are signed, but I think the real proof of the pudding, if you like, will be in the details in the long run. I mean, for example, she spoke with China's #2 leader, Premier Li, yesterday about China's steel overproduction. Now, to some that might not sound incredibly sexy as an issue, but it is really important for economies all over the world, even for China's economy. And it's these types of discussions which could bear fruit in the future. Now, in the coming hours, she'll be meeting President Xi Jinping when the discussion is expected to turn to international matters. That is, she could be speaking about any potential moves at the UN Security Council against North Korea. And also, that is a chance for her to be raising the subject of Hong Kong. Some have been calling on Britain's Prime Minister to be speaking about that former British colony and what seem to be the ever-eroding rights of those people who live in that special region of Hong Kong these days.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Stephen McDonald, taking a look at Theresa May's trip to China. Let's now brief you on other stories making the news. A controversial bill has been passed in Poland to outlaw any suggestion of Polish complicity in the Nazi Holocaust. Israel's fiercely objected to the draft law, which would also make it illegal to describe Nazi death camps in Poland as Polish. Critics say it seeks to limit discussion about Polish involvement. The bill has yet to be signed into law. A train chartered to carry dozens of US Congress members to a Republican Party retreat has collided with a rubbish truck in the state of Virginia. The driver of the truck was killed. 4 people were injured. Among those on board was the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Paul Ryan. 11 people have died after a fire broke out at a residence for elderly people in northern Japan. The victims, 8 men, 3 women, were among 16 residents of the facility in Sapporo on the island of Hokkaido. The other 5 residents escaped with minor injuries. Now let's focus on our lead business story today. It is Facebook, the world's biggest social network, has got even bigger. They've seen another big jump in profits as well, the kind of money they're making month on month, as more people around the world do sign up. But what's interesting is, despite the mind-boggling numbers they have put out there, Facebook has also revealed its users are spending less time on the network. So is that a new trend or a blip? We've got Stephanie Hare with us, independent political risk analyst. Good to see you, Stephanie.
Morning.
So what did you make of Facebook's numbers? Because initially on financial markets, the shares dropped by something like 5%, but then they ended the day higher again.
Well, what I take from that is that people listening to the call took some reassurance from what the Facebook executives were saying, and I question whether or not that will actually hold. So most people have been spending time on Facebook now for years, and that's how they've been making money. But now we're seeing the user numbers drop in terms of time spent on the site, which means people aren't spending as much time engaging with advertising, right? So the question is, how are they going to make money if people aren't spending as much time on the site? And that's about making a really targeted approach so that when you are on, you see advertising that you engage with more meaningfully. So it's like quality targeting of advertising, whereas before it was maybe a bit hit and miss. I think that's their play.
Also, as well, of course, Mark Zuckerberg talks about the fact that they've had quite a difficult year, and they have on many levels, haven't they, in the sense that the whole issue with the US election, to what extent Facebook enabled abuse of that election process. Also as well, you know, what's on there, fake news, the discussion that's followed. They've had to put a lot of more people on the ground to kind of police themselves. There is that concern that they may be policed by another organisation. There's all that going on as well, isn't there? As well as the fact that they're just trying to do business and grow and get more advertising, make more money.
Exactly. Behind all of this is the specter of regulation, right? So Facebook has been trying to say for years that it's not a publishing platform and therefore it shouldn't be regulated in the same way that publishers are, that the media is. So that's really interesting, and you're right that they've had to atone almost for the Russian interference in the US election, potentially Brexit and other things. So they're trying to sort of make good gestures of faith by altering their news feed and cleaning all of that up. Whether or not people believe that is another question. Whether or not it works is another question. They're really tinkering with all of this now, and I think that's part of the problem, is people don't really necessarily trust what's happening with those algorithms that no one can see, and that's what we have to see proof of concept. Will it work?
All right, thank you very much. For now, Stephanie's going to go away. We've got some really interesting stories in the news briefing later, so do stay with us when Stephanie returns to talk about that. Let's have a look at another story now. It's a trial that has gripped audiences around the world for its harrowing and powerful testimony from survivors of sexual abuse. Now the entire board of USA Gymnastics has resigned over its failure to protect young athletes from the convicted doctor Larry Nassar. More than 250 victims accused him, who preyed on young girls under the pretense of giving them medical treatment for 2 decades. Bill Hayton has the latest.
Another day in court for Larry Nassar, the former gymnastics coach exposed as a prolific paedophile. Now time for some of his victims to break their years of silence.
I lost all motivation as I was overwhelmed with the truth of your abuse. But that ends today. You are the most vile, disgusting creature I've ever met. Scum of the earth is too high of a title for you. I hope you realize that you will never have any power over anybody for the rest of your life.
Nassar gave medical treatment to hundreds of young girls. There are now more than 265 victims. He's already been sentenced to 175 years in jail. But first, he must sit and listen to the agony his actions caused.
It is imperative that we as a society do not view this as an isolated incident. He was prolific because surrounding authorities allowed him to be, because the gymnastics world allowed him to be, because still women are not perceived to be credible.
Many are now suing Nassar for damages, and USA Gymnastics and other institutions that they accuse of ignoring their earlier allegations, which they say allowed Larry Nassar to continue to abuse young girls for more than 20 years. Bill Hayton, BBC News.
It was Mexico's bloodiest year since records began. 2017 saw more than 25,000 murders in the country. Only around 1 in 10 ever results in a successful prosecution as the government struggles to contain the violence there. Now, President Enrique Peña Nieto has pledged to get the situation under control using thousands of troops to problem areas, as Andrew Plant reports.
Another murder scene in Mexico, where police are fighting against record numbers of killings, more than 25,000 in 2017. Homicide rates are measured per 100,000 people. In Mexico, that number is 20, one of the highest rates in the world. Others, though, are higher still. Venezuela at 57, Honduras with 42, or El Salvador at 61. Mexico's government has vowed to crack down, pledging to get gang violence under control, and this is how, using more troops, aiming to round up known criminals and break up the cartels. Drugs, they say, turf wars, are fueling the violence.
The different crime gangs have slowed down their activities. People are happy that the soldiers are there now. There was a demand for a prompt response from the government. I think we will have good results over time.
The violence isn't confined to gang members. In the tourist resort of Cancun a few days ago, 3 people were killed in a bar. A tourist murdered in Acapulco. 25 deaths in the course of a single weekend. A wave of murders that's terrifying locals and putting off tourists as politicians and security forces here struggle to stay in control. Andrew Plant, BBC News.
Stay with us here on The Briefing. Still to come in the programme, we're going to have all the sports news for you, including those last-minute big money deals as football transfer window slams shut for the season. You're watching The Briefing. Here are the headlines. Britain's Prime Minister Theresa May is continuing her diplomatic trip in China, but the shadow of Brexit is still looming large. A controversial memo that claims the FBI is biased against Donald Trump is expected to be published later. A high-level summit aimed at raising funds to support education in developing countries begins today in Senegal. Among those attending are French President Emmanuel Macron and representatives from a number of international organizations. One of the overwhelming issues in the host country is the modernization of Quranic schools called daras, as Leila Adjovi discovered.
It's a regular sight in Dakar. Talibés, pupils of daras or Quranic schools, begging in the streets. Most of them are from rural areas. Their parents think they are receiving a religious education, but some will not learn a single verse of the Quran. A lucky few will end up at this safe house, the Children's Empire. There's food here, shelter and fun, salvation from the harsh conditions on the streets.
If he doesn't return with the right amount of money, he'll be beaten. The children are really maltreated. How can anyone bear to see children in that situation? They need love, affection, and to be with their families. It's their right.
This children's rights activist argues that the government is not doing enough to regulate Quranic schools and enforce an existing ban on begging. A bill to modernize daras was also drafted years ago, but it has yet to become law.
Over the years, there have been efforts to widen the curriculum of Senegalese daras by introducing general subjects like maths, history or French classes. And there are even attempts to change the ways of learning for the tiniest children going to Quranic schools.
In most pre-primary Quranic schools, this would not happen. There would be no playing with toys or drawing. There would be no girls, or at least not sitting in the same classroom as boys. And the core of the activities would revolve around memorizing the Quran. The director of this dara, based in a working-class neighborhood of Dakar, is among the imams who want Quranic schools to change.
I encourage all parents to trust the bill that aims to modernize and regulate daras. We've done a lot of work with Quranic masters to make them understand the need to improve the quality of the environment in the schools and the quality of education.
There are over 5,000 Quranic schools here. In this secular Muslim country, many parents are in favor of modernizing daras. Striking the balance is one of the major challenges facing education in Senegal. Leila Adjovi, BBC News, Dakar.
Here's our briefing now on some of the key events happening today. So the Court of Arbitration for Sport will rule in the matter of 39 Russian athletes appealing against their lifetime Olympic bans following doping offences at the 2014 Sochi Winter Games. Meanwhile, in Germany, the parliament in Berlin is expected to pass a law allowing refugees to bring family members to Germany, and they'll be setting an upper limit of 1,000 new arrivals per month. And an anti-fracking protest will take place at The Hague ahead of a parliamentary meeting to discuss the issue. Citizens and farmers are protesting against the fracking of gas in the Groningen area in the north of the Netherlands. So it's been a busy time for football in the last 24 hours. Let's bring you right up to date. Here's the latest sport from our BBC Sports Centre.
Hello, I'm Sarah Mulcairns.
Coming up just in a few moments' time, that's with me, of course. We're going to be talking about Facebook, but also India's budget day is coming up. Also, we've had some reaction from you to Formula One's decision to axe the glamorous grid girls as they're known. We asked if Formula One is moving with the times, or is this political correctness gone mad? Well, quite interesting to get some of your reactions. Steve Marriott, who's in the UK, if girls did not want to work in that sort of business, then they'd stay away from it. What next? No models on the catwalk. Also, one of my colleagues, Licia Santarelli, she says, I hate to say it, but I'm with the Sun on this one. The Sun believes it's formula dumb. I'll be back for Business Briefing in a moment. This is your Business Briefing. I'm Sally Bundock. Here are the headlines. 2.1 billion friends and counting, and more profit than ever. But Facebook users are spending less time on the network. Plus, clash of the tech titans. Apple, Amazon, Alphabet are all soaring in market value. Which will be the first to hit $1 trillion? And on the financial markets, it's quite a mixed picture emerging as the US Central Bank indicates the cost of borrowing will be headed higher again in March. So let's get going. We start with Facebook. The world's biggest social network has got bigger still, with another massive jump in the amount of money it's making, as yet more people around the world have signed up. But despite some more mind-boggling numbers from Facebook, it has revealed its users are spending less time on the network. So revenues in the last 3 months of last year came in at almost $13 billion, mostly from advertising, and around a third of that was profits. This represents a huge growth gain, up some 47% on the same period last year. So Facebook now has 2.13 billion users who log on at least once a month. That's up 14% on the year before, and that's well over a quarter of the world's 7.5 billion population. But the company's massive reach has also increased scrutiny, of course, with concerns about its effect on users' mental health and on democracy itself, with its role in spreading so-called fake news. At the start of the year, Chief Executive Mark Zuckerberg said the company is changing its algorithms to shift the focus of its newsfeed back towards friends and family. But now he's warned investors this is already making people spend less time on Facebook, a total of 50 million fewer hours per day, as our North America tech correspondent Dave Lee explains.
Facebook is saying that their changes to the newsfeed have already resulted in 50 million less hours being spent on the platform. So that's going to have a big impact on how many adverts are being seen. And as part of that announcement, Mark Zuckerberg has attached a statement to these earnings which goes into a bit more depth than usual. And he goes back into those talking points he's been making recently. I'm just going to read a small bit to you here. He's saying, in 2018, we're focused on making sure Facebook isn't just fun to use, but also good for people's well-being and for society. What he's doing there is basically saying, look, this is going to impact our network. It's already impacting our network, but it's important that we have this sacrifice right now to protect the long-term health of Facebook.
That's Dave Lee. Well, I've got Nigel Vaz with us from Publicis Sapient, which helps companies with their digital strategy. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
What do you make of the drop in time people are spending on Facebook?
I think if you look at the drop in time, what we're starting to see Mark's commitment at the beginning of the year do is start to affect the quality of the newsfeed, because more and more people were starting to see either too many commercial messages or indeed not enough trust in the messages that they were getting, and that was the comment that we saw earlier in the year about them being able to propagate stories that were not true from sources that people started to believe was coming through their actual connections on Facebook, but wasn't.
It's interesting to see the market reaction, because after the results came out, there was a swift fall in the share price, down 5%, but then it actually headed higher again, closing up some 1-point-something%. Are investors concerned about this or not? Is this a minor blip?
I think it's definitely reassuring from their perspective that Facebook is looking at the long-term health of the network and focusing on the quality. We saw their operating expenses increase pretty substantially with the commitment of adding 10,000 new folks, primarily focused on building the curation and the quality of content. So when you start to look at that trajectory that Facebook have actually adopted, people are concerned about the short-term blip and worried about whether that becomes a longer-term trend, but are also reassured with the commitment to the quality of the social network as opposed to advertising revenue in the short term.
And how will Mark Zuckerberg, keep Facebookers loyal? Because lots of people are leaving Facebook, and many are actually saying young people, millennials, those who are even younger, are not interested in Facebook at all.
I think one of the things that Facebook has done is got a good strategy on diversification. So if you look at their focus with Instagram on one end of the spectrum and WhatsApp, used far more for direct communication, and Instagram has a far younger following as compared to Facebook, you're starting to see them actually try to make sure that it is a network as opposed to a singular product, and actually starting to connect the audiences across those channels.
We shall watch this space. Nigel, thank you very much indeed. A lot of you have been in touch about Facebook this morning. Fordy in the UK, he says, I gave up using Facebook 2 years ago. It is a big relief. Also, Mark Webster, he calls it Fleecebook, the most boring social media only, and its only use is every so often, and I much prefer Twitter. Mark, thanks for getting in touch. Let's stay with Silicon Valley news, where more tech giants report their results later. The 3 A's, Apple, Amazon, Alphabet, the parent company of Google, have all seen their share price soar in 2017. So more from Dave Lee, who says that could mean one or more of them is on track for a major stock market milestone this year.
When it comes to predictions about 2018, most financial analysts agree. One US tech firm would likely become America's first ever trillion-dollar company. The question is, which one will it be? Could it be Apple? Well, that depends on its latest smartphone, the iPhone X. If sales of that device are strong, very strong, then Apple will be hurtling towards that trillion-dollar valuation, but maybe Amazon will get there first. Jeff Bezos is now comfortably the world's richest man, and Amazon's 2017 saw its share price rise by 50%. But what could hold Amazon's value back is the amount the company spends. It's expecting to splash out more than $4 billion on content for its Prime TV service. It's also investing heavily in its Alexa assistant and opening several new fulfillment centers in markets all over the world. And that's before it starts thinking about building that second headquarters it needs. So what about Alphabet? Well, the Google parent company is expected to post revenues that are about 20% higher than this time last year. But as usual, that's been driven by search advertising and YouTube, its two biggest earners. If Alphabet is to get over that trillion-dollar mark, it needs to come from somewhere else other than advertising. Keep a close eye on its hardware. The Pixel 2 smartphone was launched last year, and there was a huge marketing push for its Google Home Assistant. Any promising signs in that area would have investors jumping for joy. So which of these companies will be worth more than $1 trillion in 2018? Well, some think they all will. Dave Lee, BBC News.
Busy week for Dave this week. Let's now go to India, to the capital, New Delhi, where the finance minister is just beginning to present this year's budget. That's Arun Jaitley. He's under quite a bit of pressure to keep voters happy in the run-up to a general election in India, but also reassure investors in India and outside who may well be concerned about the state of the government's finances. Let's go to our correspondent, Davina Gupta, who is there for us. Nice to see you, Davina. So I understand Arun Jaitley has just begun proceedings. What are we expecting him to say?
Well, first up, it will be a short budget speech. Unlike 120 minutes traditionally, this budget speech is said to be shortest ever being made by the finance minister. Now, it's also very crucial, as you rightly pointed out, for the government that came into power promising an economic shake-up, but is seeing an economic slowdown. Also, it's seeing agrarian distress, high unemployment rate, and without a private investment, we haven't seen India's consumption story go forward. So this budget, there could be some relief expected for farmers, also for education sector. Some employment schemes are also expected, and basically a signal for global investors that India is open for business. It needs foreign investment to achieve its growth target of about 7 to 7.5% that the Indian government has set for itself for next year.
All right, Davina, thank you so much. We'll talk to you again later as we get more in terms of what's said in that budget. Let's talk about other earnings stories now. Lots of tech news today. We've got eBay shares jumping after it said revenues were up almost 10% in that vital holiday quarter. Improvements to its website, more marketing have attracted more shoppers despite stiff competition from Amazon. Microsoft beat Wall Street earnings forecasts as well on strong growth in its cloud computing business, but it took a one-off tax charge of more than $13 billion on cash it holds overseas, following changes to US tax laws, pushing it into a $6.3 billion quarterly loss. What's trending in terms of business news on the media today? Well, we've got from Bloomberg, US oil production surging above 10 million barrels a day. That's in November for the first time since 1970. Wall Street Journal is worried about the rise in US short-term government borrowing. That's trending there. And Business Insider, many millennials are spending more on coffee than saving for retirement. I've got a yarn about that. I might tweet you later. I'm running out of time right now. But you saw the markets earlier, the Dow up. Also elsewhere in Asia, we're seeing gains. Commodities a bit mixed. We've got crude oil headed up again. Maybe it will go above $70 a barrel in the near future. I'll see you soon. So the news briefing is coming up in just a few minutes, where we'll be looking at the main stories in the media. But first of all, here in the UK, the economic gap between the north and south will continue to grow unless the government prioritises northern education. That's the warning this morning from the Northern Powerhouse Partnership.
If your child's born in the northeast, the latest league tables suggest there's a 1 in 5 chance he or she will go to an underperforming school. Born in London, the chances are just 1 in 15. Today's report says the key to closing the north-south divide includes £300 million of new money for early years development, making the north a world leader in apprenticeships, and all northern businesses mentoring young people.
How are you finding the communications time on a Wednesday?
Barclays is one of the businesses behind today's report. They have more than 500 northern apprentices.
I think it was an opportunity that I was quite surprised to find that I didn't have to move away for, because I think my kind of preconception was you would probably have to move to have a really good career. But now, you know, my view has completely changed on that now that I found the degree programme, because you can do it from anywhere.
Is the government now stepping up after being accused of neglecting the Northern Powerhouse post George Osborne?
One of the real unsung bits about our Northern Powerhouse is the £70 million we've put into our Northern Powerhouse school strategy, which goes all the way from early years provision and making sure that is as good as it can be, to the maths and English hubs that we have set up.
The authors of today's report say if it's followed, there could be 850,000 new jobs and £100 billion of new money in the northern economy, and claim that children from all backgrounds and postcodes will be given a fairer start. Nina Warhurst, BBC News, Middlesbrough.
You're with the briefing from BBC News. Here are the headlines. British Prime Minister Theresa May is continuing her diplomatic tour of China. The shadow, though, of Brexit is looming large. A controversial memo that claims the FBI is biased against Donald Trump is expected to be published later. And aiming to support education in developing countries, a high-level summit is opening in Senegal. 2.1 billion friends and counting, and more profit than ever, but Facebook users are spending less time on the network. So let's have a look at stories that are being discussed in the media in general today. So we've got the front page of China Daily. Bear in mind this is a state-sponsored newspaper, and of course it's covering Theresa May's visit. And it says China and the UK have agreed to boost ties. Here in the UK, a big story dominating in business that the collapse of Carillion is unravelling. The Financial Times looks at fresh concerns for state contractors. It says the outsourcing giant Capita saw its shares drop 47% on Wednesday. That was on concern for its future. The Daily Telegraph is looking at the ongoing equal pay row at the BBC. It shows a number of my colleagues on its front page who attended a government hearing yesterday where Carrie Gracie, who stepped down from her role as China editor over pay, gave evidence before politicians. And then we've got The Sun, one of our tabloid dailies in the UK. It makes its feelings very clear over the axing of female models at the Grand Prix. Its headline is Formula Dumb. And then we've got The Times, where they explain why MPs in the UK will be leaving Britain's famous Houses of Parliament for at least 6 years. We'll explain why. Well, as promised, Stephanie Hare is back, political risk analyst. Lovely to see you, Stephanie. So, women are dominating the papers. We've got Theresa May to begin with, front page of China Daily. Of course, here in the UK, it's all about Brexit, and it's about, you know, citizens' rights in the UK when we do leave in March 2019 and that sort of debate. But of course, China Daily is more focused on trade and the relationship between the UK and China.
Exactly, and they're looking to have partnership for China's Belt and Road Initiative, which is all about infrastructure projects. And they really want to see if London is going to keep its position as a top global financial centre. So there's a lot of discussion about this. It's pretty normal that the Prime Minister takes a trade delegation to big countries like China or India where they're looking to do business. So David Cameron, her predecessor, did the same thing. But it is true that the United Kingdom has really amped this up, and the UK-China relationship seems to be on a better footing, I would say, since 2015.
She's calling it, you know, a golden era. It's her first visit there as Prime Minister of the UK. It's very important for her. Of course, she wants that message that Britain's open for business to be you know, very loud and clear in China. It's a very important relationship, and of course the UK needing every trade relationship going right now.
Exactly, and it's also this question of, you know, it's not just the UK in terms of finance, but it's the kind of investment in technology and AI, areas where China is really looking to claim global leadership. Can the United Kingdom be part of that success story in China?
Now, Capita share plunging. This is a outsourcing services company here in the UK, and there was a real concern about the fact that it's had several profit warnings. It sounds like a similar tale to Carillion, but actually this article points out it's not a similar tale, and perhaps Capita is not headed in the same direction as Carillion.
Well, and it raises this question about, you know, whether or not key public services are supposed to be outsourced to the private sector, and the whole reason that what's happening is that the private sector likes to boast that it can do so more efficiently to keep costs down. So why has this company gotten into this problem? It says that right now its operations are too complex.
It's got over 100 contracts, hasn't it?
Yep.
With the UK government, providing all sorts of services, extremely diverse, and perhaps many argue it was a company that bought lots of other companies. It's just kind of spread itself far too thinly.
Quite, and that's then a question of oversight. So if the government knows that, and this company is providing key oversight and provision of services, and now it's in a jam, where actually does responsibility lie? Because the services still have to be provided, right? This is a company that provides the administrative services for the NHS, for example, so we're talking critical things.
Many would argue, though, that the boss, the CEO, is actually kind of on this much, much earlier than in the case of Carillion, and so therefore they'll sort of sort things out. It won't head in the same direction, i.e. bankruptcy. I mean, 50,000 people work for Capita. We're talking a lot of people with a huge influence on how we do things in this country, aren't we?
Yeah, and the earlier that you bring this news public, sometimes the better, in the sense that it gives you options to sell assets or go to shareholders to raise more funds. So, yes.
I want to mention as well, just above that story, a picture of Janet Yellen, who was the first ever woman to head the US Federal Reserve. She finishes her term this weekend. What a brilliant job she has done. I think everybody I've spoken to have agreed with that. So Janet Yellen, a history maker, on the front page of the Financial Times, and then there's more women on the front page of the Telegraph and other papers. This ongoing battle within the BBC about pay equality, gender pay. Carrie Gracie in front of a parliamentary select committee on Wednesday, as was Tony Hall, the Director General of the BBC.
Yes, and I mean, this resonates really more widely in society. So we have companies that are going to have to be reporting on the gender pay gap among their employees.
In
and
a few
also,
months' time.
Exactly,
Absolutely.
and also pay equality. And I think she raises a really interesting point in her testimony, which is all about, was she in development? This is a 30-year professional, right? And I think a lot of women will recognize that in terms of skills not being perhaps valued as equally, and also for the men perhaps not realizing that they're getting paid more, but their female colleagues might be doing exactly the same job. How do
the
the
other
men feel
issue
about
as well,
that?
it's a big issue for men and women, it's regardless of gender, is the lack of transparency about what people earn and what their position is. I was just thinking about, you know, Janet Yellen. Was she paid more or less than Ben Bernanke, or what Jerome Powell will be earning when he starts this weekend? I mean, we just we don't know in many cases.
Right?
That is
Employers
the
always
issue.
have the power.
Now, talking of power, what do you think of this decision on the part of Formula One? So the so-called grid girls will not be a part of the 2018 Formula One season. The Sun says Formula dumb. I have to say, quite a few viewers are actually agreeing with the Sun's stance on this. They feel it's political correctness gone mad. We're going too far now.
I surprised myself in this in agreeing with the Sun. I think there's a really interesting question that we're having here as a culture, which is about how we want women to be represented in culture. But there's also a question about power. And if these women want to do this job, it's not illegal, there's nothing horrific happening here. It's, yes, they're doing a job, it's often based on their looks, etc. That's actually true in many jobs. So why here, why now, and where is the power? And what are they supposed to do afterwards? And did anyone ask them? So
well, it's interesting actually, because I was on my way to work this morning, I was listening to BBC World Service, and a grid girl was being interviewed, and I can't remember her name unfortunately, but she was saying what an absolute shame, how much she loved her job, how she felt it really added to the event, and therefore she doesn't feel it's a necessary move. It's not about female empowerment as such. Interesting, last week at the World Economic Forum, empowering women was a huge theme of the week. All the co-chairs of the World Economic Forum were women like Christine Lagarde, Chetna Sinha, lots of incredible women who are really helping other women around the world. And it would be interesting to hear what they thought about this. Because same with the BBC Women on the March headline, the female empowerment story at Davos was about women who face discrimination, who face you know, racial issues because of the, you know, their race, their caste, depending on where they are in developing nations. I mean, they're in danger. I mean, it's a different story, isn't it, depending on where you are.
And all of the corrective measures being taken so often don't consult women. It's being imposed upon them. So I think that's the interesting question, to take it back to grid girls, is who's asked the grid girls?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about the Times now. Politicians having to quit the Palace of Westminster for the first time since the Blitz. It's having a rehaul, isn't it?
Well, it's a health and safety nightmare. I mean, my favorite part about this story was that the debate took place with a robin flying around the chamber, which tells you about, this is a vermin problem and, you know, sort of power cuts.
Birds can get in.
It just sounds like a disaster. So, you know, it's going to be expensive, it's going to be painful. It starts in 2025 and is expected to take at least 6 years. But it sounds like it has to happen. I mean, in no other workplace would this be allowed.
I mean, anyone who's in London at the moment, we walk past Big Ben, it's covered in scaffolding. I mean, these buildings are extremely old. And, you know, they're not quite falling apart, but they do need a lot of necessary uplifting, as it were, or sort of looking after it. It's going to cost an arm and a leg, though.
But it's also a national treasure. So
Indeed.
we have to take care of it for
we
future generations.
We absolutely do. Now, Stephanie, I just want to share with you some tweets we've been getting in. We were talking about Facebook earlier. I have had more Facebook tweets this morning on the briefing than we have had about Formula One. Most of them really negative. They're turned off Facebook right now. That's the general feeling. I know, obviously, we have a certain audience of a certain age and demographic, so we not necessarily have hardcore Facebookers watching us. But your thoughts on that? How trends are changing in social media?
I mean, I know that they were trying to be really upbeat on their call, but I do wonder if they've missed a trick, which is I think that they've overplayed their hand in terms of the Russian interference in U.S. elections. People don't trust Facebook now. Everybody's become really savvy about the fact that there's manipulation happening.
Also, as well, a lot of people talk to me about how they have conversations with somebody with their smart device near them, and then suddenly on Facebook they're getting advertising about that very subject they were discussing half an hour before, and how they feel that's quite kind of creepy. A bit like Big Brother.
Well, I think we're all
targeted advertising on your conversations with a friend.
Well, exactly, and and also the mental health issues. So now that we've had all this transparency about what's actually happening and how they're making money off of us, I think a lot of people are just like, no, thank you, I don't want it anymore.
Are you a big user of social media yourself? I know you are on Twitter.
Twitter, yes, but nothing else. I got off all of that stuff a long time ago, probably because I was reading these stories very early and did my own assessment. I also just think it's not very fun. I like living in real life.
Indeed, real conversations with real people. We can eyeball people that way. Stephanie, thank you so much for coming in. It's been good to have you on The Briefing. Thank you too for your company. I'll see you really soon. Bye-bye.